Alright, what's going on everyone? The release of Commander Masters is nearly upon us, and with it comes 4 new Commander decks. Now, we don't have time to go over every single card in all 4 decks, so the purpose of this video is going to be to just give brief overviews of all 4 decks so you can decide which deck best fits your playstyle. So let's get right into it with Planeswalker Party, a jeskai deck with Commodore Guff as the commander. It's a Planeswalker that will add a loyalty counter to another Planeswalker at end of turn. It will also make 1/1s that you can tap for mana for Planeswalkers, and you can draw X cards and deal X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of Planeswalkers you control. So yes, this is a tribal Planeswalker deck. We don't have time to cover all the Planeswalkers because there's a whole lot of them, but suffice it to say there are a ton of Planeswalkers in this deck, 18 of them in fact, including 3 new ones, Teo, Vronos, and Chandra. Teo makes a flying wall when he enters. He will let you and an opponent draw, and forces everyone to attack to their left or right. You get to pick. Vronos will phase out Planeswalkers to protect them on your opponent's turn, can bounce your opponent's things, and makes 0/9 walls. And Chandra deals X damage every turn to all of your opponents, where X is the number of Planeswalkers you control. She also adds red mana and can convert loyalty counters into free cards off the top of your library. We also get a bunch of new Planeswalker payoffs like Onak Oathkeeper, Jaya's Phoenix, and Gatewatch Beacon. The first taxes people when they attack your Planeswalkers and can reanimate them. The Phoenix will copy loyalty abilities of Planeswalkers and reanimates when you cast them, and Gatewatch Beacon is a mana rock that enters with 3 loyalty counters and then can transfer those to Planeswalkers as you cast them. There's also a major turtle theme with this deck, with things like Silent Arbiter to limit the number of creatures that can attack, Kazul that taxes attackers and makes tokens, and Norn's Annex, which is another tax on attackers. So this just helps the deck stave off aggro decks because we're looking to play Planeswalkers, but it's kind of hard to defend yourself and your Planeswalkers when you're spending all your mana on the walkers themselves. So this just helps, keep people away from you and your side of the table while you activate your Planeswalkers every turn. It also plays things like Thrumming Bird, Gleeful Apparition, Flux Channeler, all of which proliferate so you can add more loyalty counters to your walkers. The alternate commander in this is Liori, Spark-Touched Hunter, which is a 3 mana 3/3. When it deals combat damage to a player, you can choose a Planeswalker type, then double loyalty abilities of that type until end of turn. So for example, if you have 2 Chandras, you can name her and then double all of her abilities in your second main phase. There's plenty more we don't have time to talk about. There's more payoffs for counters, there's board wipes that only hit creatures, removal and the like. But basically, if you like the idea of turtling up behind a wall of Planeswalkers, check out Planeswalker Party. Next on our list is Eldrazi Unbound, a colorless Eldrazi deck that really likes to cast big, giant spells. The commander is Zoldok Voidgorger, a 6 mana 7/4 that gives colorless spells that cost 7 or more, Cascade. So Cascade means when you cast the spell, you reveal cards off the top of your library until you reveal something that costs less mana, and then you get to cast that thing for free. So for example, if we were to cast a 7 mana spell, we get 2 free spells off the top of our library that cost 6 or less. So naturally, the deck is filled with big stupid idiots like Bane of Balaged, Artisan of Kozilek, and It That Betrays. The last 2 are particularly powerful. The Artisan returns a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield. It's already good value, and it gets even better when combined with double Cascade. And It That Betrays will return anything your opponent sacrificed to the battlefield under your control, and that's perfect with the Annihilator ability of Eldrazi creatures. The deck also has things like Ugin, Forsaken Monument, and Darksteel Monument to help actually cast these things. Ugin will reduce the cost of colorless spells by 2. Forsaken Monument adds a colorless mana whenever we tap for colorless, which effectively doubles our mana from our lands and also powers up our mana rocks. And Darksteel Monument will let us cast colorless spells for 0 mana once per turn. And note that even if you pay 0 mana for a spell, that doesn't affect the mana value, so your commander will still double Cascade. In fact, this deck plays Metalwork Colossus, which works similarly. It costs 11 mana, but it has its cost reduced by the number of non-creature artifacts we control, like mana rocks, but even if you pay 0 mana for it, the mana value is still 11, so it will still double cascade with your commander. There's also a bunch of new powerful spells for Eldrazi decks like Calamity of Titans, Desecrate Reality, and Flayer of Loyalties. The first lets you reveal a colorless creature from your hand, then exiles each creature in Planeswalker with less mana value. So you reveal a 7-drop, everything 6 or less gets exiled. Desecrate Reality exiles one permanent with an even mana value from each opponent, so up to 3 things, and it will also return a permanent with odd mana value from your graveyard straight to the battlefield, which of course can be very powerful considering how big our stuff is. That second ability only triggers when you use colorless mana, but the entire mana base in this is colorless, so that's not an issue. The alternate commander is Omarthus, which costs double X and enters with X +1/+1 counters, then will get extra counters whenever something else with counters enters the battlefield. Then when it dies, it will manifest equal to the number of counters it has. There is some support for this. Not only are there creatures that enter with counters, but there are some Manifest Matters cards as well, so this isn't completely pointless, but I don't know if there are enough to justify this as your commander. It's a solid addition to the deck, and you could probably build around it with a separate deck if you wanted to. But yeah, there's plenty more we don't have time to talk about. There's some classic Eldrazi staples, some massive powerful creatures and big spells, and all of that, but basically if you want to cast massive colorless spells, Eldrazi Unbound might be the deck for you. Next up is Enduring Enchantments, an Abzan enchantment deck with Enigthia, Hand of Erebos as the commander. She gives enchantment creatures menace, and then when she attacks, she will reanimate an enchantment and turn it into a 3/3 black zombie. Technically, she exiles it and then creates a token copy. And remember that you will still get the effects of that enchantment, so that's a pretty powerful effect, a free 3/3 zombie that's also going to have all the enchantment text on it. So let's start with some of the new enchantment payoffs like Composer of Spring, Ondu Spirit Dancer, and Boon of the Spirit Realm. The first lets you put lands into play for free when you play enchantments, and if you have 6 or more enchantments, you can also put creatures into play for free instead. Ondu Spirit Dancer says when an enchantment enters the battlefield, you can create a token copy of it. You can only do that once per turn, but it does say when an enchantment enters, not when you cast it, so it can duplicate reanimated enchantments from your commander, and the boon will get a blessing counter whenever an enchantment enters, then gives your creatures +1/+1 for each blessing counter on it. So once again, that works really well with your commander. You bring enchantments back as creatures, and then they're all going to get pumped based on how many creatures you've returned, right? If this is in play and you reanimate 3 creatures just by themselves, that's going to put 3 blessing counters here and then give them all +3/+3, so there'll be 6 6s with menace. So that works pretty well, and it's even more powerful because enchantment decks are very good at going wide. So the deck has Archon of Sun's Grace, Felidar Retreat, Sigil of the Empty Throne. The first makes 2/2 flying Pegasus tokens whenever we play enchantments. The Retreat can either make a 2/2 or put +1/+1 counters on everything whenever we play lands, and the Sigil makes 4/4 flyers whenever we play enchantments. So you can see how wide we can go, especially with our commander also making an army of enchantments from our graveyard. There are also a ton of enchantment payoffs you might expect, like Starfield Mystic, Sithis, and Cetizen Champion. The first makes things cheaper and gets counters when enchantments die. The other 2 will draw every time we play an enchantment. Sithis also gains life, and the champion gets +1/+1 counters, and this is very typical of enchantment decks. It is so easy to draw cards. There's stuff like Mesa Enchantress, Satyr Enchanter, Venduran Enchantress. All of these do the same thing. It's just draw, draw, draw as you play enchantments. It is very difficult to run out of gas when you're playing an enchantment deck. Another important aspect of this deck is getting enchantments in the graveyard because our commander wants to reanimate them. And one way this deck ensures that it has a graveyard is with sagas like Battle of the Hellvault, Binding of the Old Gods, and Battle for Bredegard. The first will exile stuff for the first 2 chapters until it leaves the battlefield, and then creates Abzan, an 8/8 flying vigilance indestructible. Pretty good. Binding blows up a non-land, and that's a very wide, right? It's not a creature, it's non-land, so anything. Then it'll get a land and give everything death touch, and the battle will make 2 1/1s over 2 turns, and then it creates token copies of unique tokens, which, as we saw earlier, we make a wide variety of tokens, so that final ability could put out a whole bunch of different types of tokens. And anyway, what these things are very good at is, well, they die, right? You play them, you get all the effects, then they go into the graveyard, which is good with our commander because ideally we would like other enchantments, but this helps ensure that we have something to reanimate. We don't want to attack with our commander and have an empty graveyard. You know, if our opponents just haven't been blowing anything up, well, we can always reanimate these because they're going to the graveyard regardless. There are also a lot of enchantments that sacrifice themselves. So we have stuff like this that, you know, once again, can just help us get enchantments to the graveyard if we're desperate enough, as well as creatures that like to sacrifice enchantments like Demon of Fate's Design and Nyxborn Behemoth. Both of these are new, and they just give us extra ways to ensure we have gas in the tank for our commander. The alternate commander for this one is Narcy Fablesinger. She lets us draw cards whenever we sacrifice enchantments, like sagas, because they are technically sacrificed, and whenever the final chapter of a saga resolves, she'll make each opponent lose X life, and we gain X, where X is that saga's mana value. There's 7 total in the deck, so I don't know if it's worth switching, but you could definitely build an entire deck around this for sure. Anyway, there's more we don't have time to talk about, lots of really powerful enchantments and enchantment payoffs, but basically if you've ever wanted to play Abzan enchantments, now's your opportunity, and this one lets us build an army from the graveyard, so it's a little bit different from your typical enchantment deck. Our final deck is Sliver Swarm. Yep, it's another 5 mana Sliver commander, just what everyone's been asking for, I know. But on the plus side, Sliver Gravemother does have a very unique feel to it. It says the legend rule doesn't apply to slivers, which is interesting. Wait a second. It says the legend rule doesn't apply to slivers you control. You control. Wait, excuse me. It doesn't impact every sliver. Only slivers you control. Nope. 0 out of 10. 0 out of 10. What is this? What is this? Anyway, it also gives all slivers Encore X, where X is their mana value. So if you're not familiar with Encore, basically you pay these slivers mana cost in the graveyard, you exile it, then you make 1 copy of that sliver for each opponent you have. It gains haste, and then it gets exiled at end of turn. So if you have 3 opponents, you can make a sliver, get 3 copies of it, give it haste, get lots of power, and then it'll exile end of turn. So this definitely is going to create massive surges of power, allowing you to potentially just amass a huge army out of your graveyard suddenly. Also, you can let your commander go to the graveyard, pay the encore cost, get 3 copies of it, and then when it dies, then you can send it back to the command zone. So that's interesting, I guess. So we all know what slivers do. I don't know if I really need to discuss them too much. There's slivers that pump all your other slivers, and there's more slivers that pump up your slivers, and there's slivers that give keywords, and there's slivers that give all your slivers abilities, and you know, I feel like this is pretty self-explanatory here. There are some new slivers though, like Hatchery, Capricious, and Regal Sliver. The first can be replicated and then gives all your other slivers replication, so that can just let you duplicate and copy all your slivers. Capricious Sliver will exile stuff off the top of your library and then let you play them until end of turn, and Regal Sliver will give all your slivers +1/+1 whenever a sliver enters if you're the monarch, and if you're not, then you become the monarch, because, you know, sliver decks really need more card draw. Right, I'm not bitter. There's also Taunting Sliver, Lazotep Sliver, and Titan of Lajara. Once again, these are all new. The first will goad your opponent's stuff when you play slivers. Lazotep gives them all Afflict 2, and will amass slivers when a sliver dies. And the Titan can enter as a sliver, because it can choose the creature type, and then draw cards equal to your sliver count. 2 other new payoffs for this deck include Descendant's Fury and For the Ancestors. The first will let you sacrifice obsolete slivers to reveal cards off the top until you hit a new one and put that straight onto the battlefield. And remember that your commander encores slivers, so you can encore a sliver from the graveyard. It's gonna sacrifice itself at end of turn anyway, so you can sacrifice it to this to get a new fresh sliver that's just gonna stay in play. And For the Ancestors will let you name a creature type, then look at the top 6, reveal any number of them, and put them into your hand, any number that share that creature type. And it also has flashback, so that's great card advantage, not just for this deck, but any tribal deck. The alternate commander with this one is Rukarumel. they're a biologist. I don't know. You name a creature type, then all your slivers become that type in addition to their other types. She also makes 1/1 slivers. I don't think you're going to be replacing Sliver Grave Mother with this, but I imagine you can get up to some spicy shenanigans with this because you don't have to play it in a sliver deck. In this case, she's going to give your slivers the zombie type or whatever, right? But in another deck, you can just do crazy stuff with creature types. So I think that's going to be the key. In this deck, she's basically just going to make 1/1s, but an interesting card. So anyway, yeah, slivers. Slivers, lots of slivers. If you like slivers, then slivers. So those are your 4 decks for Commander Masters. If this video is helpful, a thumbs up is appreciated. Be sure to check the description for a link to the complete deck list if you're interested in that. I'll also leave Amazon affiliate links to the decks, and as always, I actively discourage you from using those if you have a local game store. Be sure to let me know in the comments which deck you're most interested in, but in the meantime, I hope this video was useful. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.